Wine was sitting on the bed, feeling the darkness of the night descending to her soul. She visibly trembled at the thought of her new husband. His hollow eyes were absent-mindedly fixed on her the whole time. Wine glanced at the wall clock. It was past 1 a.m., but 𝐻𝐻𝐻 was nowhere. She felt her back stiff from sitting straight for a few hours. She didn't know when she went into deep slumber, until she felt hot air against her face, making her jolt. As soon as she opened her eyes met 𝐻𝐻𝐻's bloodshot red eyes, staring dead at her. Wine's throat went dry and the events of the past flashed through her eyes, until out of the blue, 𝐻𝐻 chuckled and lazily lay on her lap. Her breath hissed and he stared at her with a wide smile. "Come closer." He gestured for her. Wine bit her lips and hesitantly moved her face closer to his. 𝐻𝐻 brushed his fingertips against her face. Wine realized he reeked of alcohol. She felt somewhat at ease knowing he was drunk. "You're drunk," she mumbled. He chuckled bitterly and shook his head vigorously. "No, I'm not drunk." He paused for a while and placed her hand on his heart. "It hurts here," he whispered. Wine just stared at him, not knowing what to say. Her grief was indescribable. She was in pain, but he was also in pain. He snuggled into her and wrapped his arms around her waist tightly. Wine faintly wiggled, causing him to look at her. "I want to sleep here. It's peaceful." He mumbled and closed his eyes. Wine's body stiffened. She stared at him with confusion. Next morning, Wine woke up feeling moments. As soon as she opened her eyes, she met 𝐻𝐻's dark gaze. She swiftly straightened up and jumped out of the bed. "I'm sorry. You were drunk, so..." She left her sentence incomplete. 𝐻𝐻 frowned, seeing her visibly trembling. He stared at her lower head and opened his mouth to speak, but Wine ran to the washroom, leaving him dumbfounded. 𝐻𝐻 shook his head and ran his fingers through his hair. He closed his eyes. His head was throbbing in a sharp pain. The events of last night flashed before his eyes. He was surprised, realizing the first time in 4 years he had a good sleep. His heart felt at peace after so long. He laid on the bed, thinking about Wine and his past life. After 20 minutes, Wine came out of the washroom timidly. 𝐻𝐻 stood and walked closer to her. "Get ready quickly. We have to meet my parents before leaving to the reception hall," he said, glancing at the wall clock. It was almost noon. She nodded with a lower head as usual. 𝐻𝐻 shook his head and walked into the washroom. Wine let out a sigh of relief as soon as she heard the door closed. She stood before the dressing mirror, staring at her reflection in a daze. At what point has fate left her? Will 𝐻𝐻 treat her the same as Paul? Or worse? She didn't know how much time had passed until 𝐻𝐻's reflection startled her. She flinched and almost bumped into the vanity table. "What's it? Why are you so scared?" "Even when you woke up, you're still scared, as if I'm some kind of ghost," he said in a low tone, moving closer to her. Wine's throat went dry and she moved her lips, but her voice was stuck. "What happened? Speak up." "I made you angry." Doubt flashed across his eyes. "You made me angry." She nodded vigorously. 𝐻𝐻 pursed his lips, staring at her persistently. "I was angry with myself. Because of me, you had to sit the whole night uncomfortably in that big gown." Wine's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. She stared at him as if he had gone crazy. "Well, leave that. Get ready. We have to leave." "I'm ready." She glanced at her clothes and said, "This is ready. At least put on some makeup and a bit of fancy dress." "Are these dull new brides?" he asked with raised brows. Gloom took over her face, reminiscing past events. "I'm not used to it. Paul never allowed me," she mumbled. 𝐻𝐻 held her chin and lifted her face. "Paul, your ex-husband," he whispered. Wine nodded, lowering her gaze, which was full of fear, sorrow, agony, and grief. Subconsciously, he clenched his jaw. "Don't stutter in front of me again." He let go of her. Wine let out a sigh of relief and rushed into the wardrobe. 𝐻𝐻 made a mental note to ask her about what Paul did to her. His father had tried to tell him, but he was too overwhelmed by the grief of Leah's deception. His face turned cold as soon as the thought of Leah crossed his mind. In 40 minutes, both of them were ready to leave. 𝐻𝐻 was about to squat to put on his shoes when Wine's hands came into his side, making him frown. "What are you doing?" He swiftly stepped back and held her by the elbow, raising her. "Helping you." She stopped, seeing his glare, and sucked the air trying hard not to stutter. Paul made me do this, so once more she left her sentence incomplete. Then clenched his fist and in a blink of an eye he pulled her into his arms. Stop it, Paul. I'm not Paul. You'll not do all these stupid things again, he whispered through rigid teeth. Wine's breath hissed, feeling his hot breath on her face and inhaling his cologne. She noticed he was way too handsome to look away from. Let's go now. His soft voice broke her trance. Reception hall. Mrs. King sent Wine to the beauty parlor to get her ready for the reception. Both of them arrived at the venue together. Tam was amazed by her beauty. Wine and Tam met their relatives and friends. Wine could feel Tam's gaze was on her constantly. Now they were standing with a few of Tam's business partners when Tam's friend approached them. Tam, this is Paul Miller, our soon-to-be business partner. Wine's body went stiff hearing the name of her worst nightmare. Paul came into her side and exchanged pleasantries with him. Her body shook visibly. Tam recognized him, seeing Wine's face turning white. This is Kim Wine, my wife, he said with a charming smile and held Wine by the waist. But his tone was dark and eyes were icy cold. Wine subconsciously leaned her body on Tham's for support. She didn't dare to look at Paul. Paul was stunned to see her. He thought she would not think to marry anyone. Paul stared at her with mixed emotions. He felt something crumbling inside him, seeing Tham holding her possessively. Nice to meet you, Miss Wine, he said, tilting his head. A gleam of satisfaction appeared in his eyes, noticing the impact he still had on her. Tham tightened his grasp around Wine. She met his eyes. His warning gaze compelled her to look at Paul and nod with a forced smile. Luckily, Mrs. Kim came over and took away Wine. Wine assumed her parents might have told her something as they were staring at Paul with hatred. After a while, the music changed and everyone was on the dance floor, including Wine and Tham, who had fixed his cold gaze on her, making her confused. What's it? She asked, placing her hands on his shoulder, while Tham placed his hand on her waist. Why were you scared of Paul? What did he do to you? Wine's eyes glistened. She bit her lower lip. He used to abuse you, torture you. She nodded and looked straight into his eyes. Tell me. He used to lock me in the dark basement. I wasn't allowed to step out of the room without his permission. I was given the maid's clothes to wear. He would hit me whenever he was furious. He tortured me to the extent that she stopped and let out a deep breath. I had a miscarriage and lost my baby. He didn't feel a slight remorse. Tham gritted his teeth and fixed his gaze on Paul, who was staring at them with a burning gaze from the corner. In an instant, Tham smiled and leaned towards Wine, cupping her face. He placed a soft kiss on her each eye and then on her forehead. I promise I'll make you forget every sorrow he gave you, every agony you have been through. You are my queen, I'll treat you like one. Wine felt her heart was about to pop out of her chest. Time skipped. Time passed in a blink. Wine got a lot more comfortable with Tham. Before her marriage, she thought Tham would be no different than Paul. But he made her believe that not everyone is the same. Now she came to the dining room where Tham was waiting for her. She placed the tray and picked up the bowl of soup. How was your day? He asked as usual. Nice. I had gone shopping with Mom, she said, and was about to pour him some soup, but the bowl slipped from her hands and spilled. She gasped as a few drops touched Tham's hand. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Tham stood while Wine stepped backward, shaking her head in denial. He rushed towards her. No, sorry. Tears trickled down her face. What's wrong with you? He pulled her closer, cupping her face. Don't hit me, I'm sorry, she whispered and closed her eyes. For God's sake, Wine, I'm Tham. Who do you think I am? He said softly while his gaze landed on her hand, which was red, indicating the hot soup had spilled on it. He swiftly dragged her towards the kitchen and turned on the water tap. Wine stood still, blankly staring at her hand. Do you know what you were doing just now? Your hand is burned, he said, dragging her to the dining room and sat her on the chair. He walked towards their shared bedroom and came out with an ointment. I'm sorry. Everything in the past with Paul has a really bad influence on me. I need time to recover from it, she whispered. He glanced at her. I had once mistakenly spilled the coffee. It didn't touch Paul, but still he punished me by soaking my hands in hot water. Sam felt a burning sensation in his chest. He finished applying the ointment gently and fixed his gaze on her. We were the right people for each other, but destiny wasn't by our side. He kissed her hands. Anyways, you'll not do anything from now onwards. Not even cooking. Why don't you like my cooking? He chuckled and leaned on the chair. I like it. I had never liked eating anything from outside, but Leah never cooked for me. When stared at his gloomy face, he was no different from her. However, she never tried to know what he had been through. I won't stop cooking. Let's dig in. They began eating. Sam took the dishes and sent her to the bedroom. After a while, they were in the bed staring at the ceiling. Sam, she called him out and turned to face him. Sam hummed a response and turned towards her. Where is Leah? Why did you divorce her? She asked reluctantly. Sam shrugged his shoulders. I don't know where she is. He stared at her for a while. I loved her crazily, but I never knew I was just a toy for her. She was just after my wealth. She cheated on me and aborted my babies thrice without letting me know. Wine bit her lips, not knowing what to say. Our pain is almost the same. Mine is just emotional while you are being hurt, both physically and emotionally. Yours is worse. He moved closer and held her tight, nuzzling into her chest. Mine stiffened and stared at his hair. Sam held her hand and tangled her fingers in his hair. Even if it is emotional, we still feel that physical pain and the emptiness in our chest. It doesn't let us breathe. Since I divorced Leah, I had sleepless nights. I had to get drunk or take sleeping pills. That was the reason I was drunk on our wedding night. But since you came into my life, it feels so peaceful. I found a sense of tranquility, which was lost for so long. I wish we had met earlier. One stroked his hair gently. His voice was like a melody to her ears. Do you like kids? He asked and tilted his head to look at her. Yes, I like them. Fine, then we'll make cute kids. I looked at him and chuckled. Your smile is so beautiful. Smile often, he said, staring at her in a state of trance. One smiled widely and nodded, kissing him on the cheek. Time skipped. It's been more than a month since their wedding. Both of them were taking it slow to give each other time to heal from their past. Now both of them were at the party as Sam's friend had invited them. Wine was with his friends' wives. Sam's intense gaze made her confused, constantly wandering around her. She looked at Sam, their eyes met. He winked at her with a smirk. Wine glared at him and bit her lips to stop the smile that was about to form, but it spread all over her face. As soon as her gaze landed on Paul, her smile instantly disappeared, which Sam also noticed. His eyes darkened. Wine looked away and fixed her gaze on Sam, who was shooting daggers at Paul. She walked towards Sam and was about to sit beside him, but he pulled her onto his lap. Wine gasped while everyone cooed at them. Sam smiled, tightening his grip on her. What are you doing? She barely whispered. Sit still, he whispered into her ear, ignoring his friends chanting. Were you scared when you saw Paul just now? No, I was surprised. Sam just hummed in response, snuggling into her neck. Wine's face turned red. She looked at everyone from the corner of her eyes. They were all busy talking to each other than Paul, who was staring at them. Let's go home. I can't stand this guy. Paul staring at you. I might kill him. He muttered over her neck. Give me a minute. I'll just go to the washroom. Sam nodded and released her. Just a minute. Wine got up and walked towards the washroom. After a few minutes, she came out, but Paul stopped her. Move out of my way, she said with a stern face. You're not dressed up for me this way. He took a step closer to her, while Wine took 3 steps backwards. You never smiled at me that way. He moved further closer. Stay away, she said, and was about to walk past him, but Paul held her by the arm and pressed her against the wall. How could you get married? He held her face. You are mine, come back to me. Leave me, Paul. She tried to push him, but he tightened his grip. Her eyes welled up with tears. Paul was about to speak, but Sam kicked him away from her. Are you okay? He asked softly. Wine nodded, wiping her tears. Let's go, she mumbled, clutching his coat and leaning onto him. He passed Paul a death stare and walked out. Why did you cry in front of him? He asked coldly as soon as they came out. Wine looked at him dumbfounded. Your tears give him satisfaction and pleasure. She looked down. I'm sorry, I couldn't hold back, she mumbled, encircling her arms around him. Then let out a sigh and held her close to his chest. Don't be sorry, he whispered, kissing her hair. Few months later. All these months, both of them recovered from their past completely. Paul got into an accident and lost the ability to walk while his wife left him. Now Wayne was holding papers in front of her with a wide smile and sprinting to 𝐁𝐸's office. She passed into his office where 3 people were seated. 𝐁𝐸, her bright smile made him smile. Please excuse us, he said to them. Wayne glanced at them. There was Paul, his secretary, and his father. She passed Paul's father a faint smile and walked towards 𝐁𝐸. What made my wife so happy? She threw her arms around him while they all walked out. See this? She handed him the papers. 𝐁𝐸 held it with a slight smile. As soon as he saw it, his eyes widened. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. What? He whispered. Wayne nodded with teary eyes. We'll become parents. God. Wayne, I'm so happy. He embraced her in a tight hug. Wayne opened her mouth to speak, but 𝐁𝐸 pulled out and crashed his lips on hers, taking her off guard. After a while, he broke the hug. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you so much. He kissed her on the forehead. She chuckled. I should be the one to thank you, she mumbled, pressing her forehead against his, while Paul was still watching them from the half-open door. He glanced at his wheelchair and then at Wayne. A faint smile appeared on his face. He shook his head and looked up where his dad was staring at him. You did this to yourself. You killed your own child. Now stop annoying them, he said with a stern face and dragged away Paul's wheelchair.